That was a couple years ago. It was September of 2008. And at the time, Troy was scheduled to be executed in Atlanta, or in Georgia. So I had never heard of him, and I jumped online and I Googled his name and I learned everything I could, and for those of you that have been involved in this case, I think you know the feeling I'm talking about, where you just learn fact after fact after fact that's so shocking. It boggles the imagination when you learn that 7 of 9 witnesses have said that they were wrong. It wasn't Troy Davis. Alleged police coercion, and still the authorities refused to re-examine this case. That mistake after mistake after mistake was made, and no one has stepped up to correct those mistakes, to really examine this case and look for justice. So when I learned all about that, I got involved in Troy's case, and we stopped that execution. We were driving down to the jailhouse, to the death chamber, stand vigil while Troy was being killed. And on our way there, we got a call saying the U.S. Supreme Court had stepped in and he wasn't going to be executed. And outside the prison, we're all standing in a parking lot. And I met Troy's mom, I met his sister, his sisters, his nephew, many of his friends, and we ended up holding a very impromptu prayer vigil there out in the parking lot, when there were maybe 50 or 60 people all there. We had this huge circle and we prayed together, we hugged each other, we cried together, and it was this amazingly joyous moment because an innocent man was still alive. That's happened twice more since then. Troy has faced death 3 times, and each time the Supreme Court has come through, or a court has come through and saved his life. That's 3 times that he has been told, we are going to murder you, and then it hasn't happened. And our president says that in this country we don't torture people, but we tell people we're going to murder them. So when I learned about this case, when I got involved, that's when I realized that this is the most important issue that I could devote my time to. This was the way that I could really get involved and do my part to prevent injustice. And so that's why I've started working on the death penalty, and when I moved out here, I kept working on the death penalty when I joined up with the ACLU of Southern California. And we're all standing here wearing I Am Troy Davis t-shirts, and I think that's really important. That's a very important sentiment to realize that, as Tala told us, we are all Troy Davis. When anyone in this country can be rounded up by the police, thrown in jail on bogus testimony, sentenced to death on bogus testimony, and the system can just forget about it. They can ignore the problem. They cannot correct the mistakes. We are all victims of injustice. Any one of us can be dragged off and sentenced to death for a crime we didn't commit. So another aspect to this is that today, as Tala told us, is a day of solidarity. We're standing with Troy and with his family and with all people who have been sentenced to death as we stand and say that this is wrong. This is injustice. And we are watching this hearing to make sure that justice is finally done in this case. So even though there's not a lot of us here today, right, there's just a handful, but this handful is important. It's a group of people who are across the country, thousands of miles away, who are standing in solidarity with Troy, who are watching this hearing and telling the world that we demand justice. So I want to thank you all once again for coming and for standing with us in solidarity and for showing the world that none of us will accept an injustice like this. So thanks a lot. I'd like to introduce Alan Toy, who's the board president of the ACLU of Southern California.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming. It saddens me that, 70,000 people show up for a basketball parade and 17 come to stop the death penalty. 3,300 people on death row in this country. 3,300 people. And California has one of the highest numbers. We all think that Texas is the state where, all the death penalty happens. But it's California. We're supposed to be this liberal, lefty, moonbeam state, but we're sentencing people to death left and right in this state. And, it just doesn't, it escapes everybody's notice for some reason. And it bothers me that we become so callous that we think that the way to get rid of murder in our society is by murdering people. How absurd is that? That's like so, it's not even Monty Python because at least they're funny, but it's absurd. And since '73, 138 people have been released from death row after evidence was found showing their innocence. Now, some of them were taken right up to the moment of execution. And once you execute somebody, you can't go, oh gosh, we made a mistake. We found somebody here that says they lied, or we found evidence or DNA that shows that you weren't really the person who did that. Now, almost every day or every week anyway, we see people released from prison after sometimes 20, 30 years because finally the DNA shows that they weren't the people who did the crime. It was somebody else. You can't do that when you've killed somebody. What do? You dig them up and you say, I'm so sorry? Or you go to their family and say, oh, gee, how can we make this up to you? You can't make it up to them. So it's not just that issue. It's the fact that the death penalty costs our society far, far more than keeping people in prison just as a life without parole kind of thing. We now are spending so much money on that if you got rid of the death penalty in California over the next 5 years, I think it is, we could save $1 billion in this debt-ridden, bankrupt state. $1 billion. What can we put that towards? I don't know, education, trying to make a better system for young people so they don't turn to crime or they can escape from the desperation of poverty. $1 billion, folks. It's possible to lock somebody up. In fact, some would say that might be a worse penalty if somebody actually does commit murders and commit horrible crimes. Maybe it's worse to have them languish in jail for the rest of their lives than to allow them to become martyrs, for example. Political prisoners, if we kill political prisoners like we killed Timothy McVeigh, and some of these people from Gitmo are facing death penalty sentences, then they become martyrs. So we're making martyrs out of criminals, those who actually everybody would say, oh yeah, we think that maybe this person should die. They killed 3,000 people in New York, and more at the Pentagon, and more in that airplane that fell down in Pennsylvania. Maybe they should die, but when you kill people like that, you're creating lifetime, forever martyrs for the people whose causes you want to discredit. So it's the whole thing, no matter how you slice it, how you build a case for the death penalty, it always seems to be just some kind of savage vengeance that comes out of what we are that is less than human. This is not who we should strive to be or what our society should hold themselves up as. In fact, our country, so civilized, so progressive, so sophisticated, et cetera, is one of the only remaining industrial countries in the world that still kills people for crime. And that's just not right. And so I hope as we go out of here we can reinvigorate ourselves and become harder activists, because we're reaching to the fire here, let's face it. But let's take this moment, look around, see the gap behind us, the void behind us, and figure out how do we fill that gap with people the next time. And thank you all for coming and for the work.